Welcome, ghouls, to today's special Halloween episode of Mental Health is Horrifying. I'm your horror Barbie host of darkness, Candace Green, psychotherapist and all-around spooky bitch, podcasting from my bat-filled cave in Toronto, Canada. It's the best time of the whole year, a time when the world gets a little bit spookier, a little bit more pumpkin spiced, and when we bust out classic horror movies that have been scaring us for generations. It's Halloween! Happy Halloween, you spooky ghouls! And it's not just Halloween season. We're actually talking about the absolute classic movie, John Carpenter's Halloween, on today's episode. When I was deciding which movie to choose for this special Halloween episode, I really took a second look at Laurie Strode in Halloween and thought, wait a second, she looks familiar. And not just because she's played by our Lord and Savior Jamie Lee Curtis, but as a therapist to final girls, she looks like a lot of the people that I work with. The good girlism, the perfectionism, the over-functioning anxiety, the expectations. Carrying the mantle of the ultimate final girl is so much pressure. It's so stressful that it can kind of feel like a relentless anxiety boogeyman is stalking you, lurking around every corner, making it impossible to let your guard down, waiting for you to slip up and be anything less than perfect. Okay, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about Halloween and its portrayal of Laurie Strode's over-functioning anxiety and her pursuit to uphold the mantle of the perfect final girl.
Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago. Michael?
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. I think he'll come back.
Exploring uncharted territory.
Totally charted.
Just talk.
Sure. The only reason she babysits is to have
Halloween.
On the night of Halloween 1963, in the suburban Illinois town of Haddonfield, 6-year-old Michael Myers stabs his teenage sister Judith to death while she brushes her hair with her yablos out. He seems unfazed. Fast forward to 15 years later, and Michael Myers has been in a sanitarium all this time. Except he breaks out, and his psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Loomis, is going to have to do a lot of paperwork. On Michael's way back to his beloved hometown of Haddonfield, he kills a mechanic and steals his coveralls, and then steals a white mask from the hardware store. Gotta get the look right. He begins stalking teenager Laurie Strode, whom he saw drop off a key at his long-abandoned childhood home that Laurie's father is trying to sell. Laurie notices Michael throughout the day, lurking behind the bushes, in the clothesline, outside her class, but her friends Annie and Linda dismiss her concerns to talk about boys and drugs. Loomis arrives in Haddonfield and discovers that Michael has stolen Judith's tombstone from the local cemetery, which can't be good. That night, Michael follows Annie and Laurie to their babysitting jobs. Laurie watches Tommy while Annie watches Lindsay across the street. Throughout the night, Michael lurks around and kills random people. He kills Annie, he kills Linda, he kills a poor sweet innocent dog, and he kills Linda's boyfriend Bob after they had sex because sex is bad. Laurie goes to check on the scene across the street, only to find all her friends super dead and Judith Meyer's tombstone upstairs, which means something. Michael then begins terrorizing Laurie and the kids she is watching. But Laurie fights back. She stabs him with a knitting needle and a knife and a coat hanger. But this guy just won't die. Like, is he doing cold plunges or Cairo or something? What's his secret? Loomis arrives as Michael is strangling Laurie and shoots him 6 times, and then he falls off the balcony. But do you think he dies? Of course not. He's indestructible. When Loomis looks over the balcony railing, Michael has vanished. Laurie sobs anxiety tears. She'll never be able to relax, will she? As you can see, Halloween's plot is very simple. So why is it considered one of the most influential and important horror films ever made, having sprawled a franchise of 13 films and 5 somewhat competing storylines? Whatever happened to Josh Hartnett, okay? That's all I'm asking. Whatever happened to him and where is he now? For one, it's the score by John Carpenter, who also produced the film with Deborah Hill. The music is so iconic and effective, looming, relentless, harkening back to the menacing simplicity of Jaws. And although we had already gotten to know a few final girls throughout the years by this point, Laurie Strode, I think, really exemplifies the archetype as the quintessential final girl, which we'll get into a bit more later. Another reason why this movie has become so iconic over the years is because it stars the supreme scream queen, Jamie Lee Curtis. She is supreme not only due to her portrayal of final girls in horror movies throughout literally 5 decades, in movies like Prom Night, Terror Train, and the TV show Scream Queens and the Halloween franchise, but she is also the daughter of Janet Leigh, arguably the OG Scream Queen for her portrayal of Marion Crane in what I believe is the most influential, not only horror, but movie ever made, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Halloween was made on a minuscule budget of around $300,000, but grossed $70 million upon its initial release, and God knows how much this franchise has made over the years. Michael Myers probably lives in a nice penthouse right about now instead of that shack in Haddonfield. Michael Myers, initially referred to as The Shape, has become a household name and a relentless, undying menace that everyone has somehow come to love. It just goes to show that when it comes to scaring people, it doesn't take a big budget or a particularly complex plot. Just strike on something simple, universal, that everyone can identify with. Like an anxiety that just won't go away and stalks you forever until you throw him in a trash compactor 44 years later in the finale. The term final girl was first coined by Carol J. Clover in her 1992 book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film. Which is an interesting fact because final girls existed long before 1992, but I guess we just didn't have a clear name or definition for them. And that's interesting too, because it's like they just evolved naturally out of the collective unconscious, our own understanding of what it means to be a good girl, and our capacity to endure. Clover defines the final girl as the sole survivor among a group of people who are being terrorized by a villain. The final girl is deemed worthy of survival by the horror gods, by God herself, because of some moral high ground she has over the other characters. And in this context, morality is defined as being virginal, not doing drugs or drinking alcohol, being kind, and doing the right thing. The final girl often saves others, and most of the time, she is the one who survives to tell the tale, and who survives for a final showdown with the villain. In her book, Clover references horror and mystery suspense films that came out in the 70s and 80s, where the final girl trope was rooted in sexist beliefs about gender roles and what it meant to perform femininity well. Whereas the virgin, chaste, moral final girl survives due to her correct portrayal of femininity under the male gaze, the women in these films who have sex, do drugs, forget their chemistry books, talk loudly, or brush their hair with their yabos out, were always killed off. Since the 90s, the final girl trope has evolved significantly, with final girls no longer needing to be purely virginal or even necessarily female. Think of Sidney Prescott's meta final girl in Scream, or Grace Lee in Ready or Not, or Emerald Hayward in Nope. Or how about someone like Chris Washington in Get Out? Is he a final dude? So, what exactly is it like to be a final girl? In Halloween, Laurie Strode tries so hard to be the perfect final girl that she looks like she's going to pull a muscle. We first meet Laurie as she leaves her house for school, carrying a bunch of books, and her dad is asking her to drop off a key for a house he is selling because she is responsible. She greets little Tommy on the street, who she is babysitting that Halloween night, and she has found a way to somehow keep her white stockings impeccably clean. And we immediately get that POV shot of Michael Myers watching, lurking, breathing, like an externalized manifestation of Laurie's final girl anxiety. He's like, but what if you forget to drop off the key? What if you're late for babysitting? What if you get your perfect white stockings dirty and then everyone knows what a big stupid idiot you are? Right? Michael Myers does seem to appear in the movie whenever Laurie might slip or when there is sin. Tommy asks, what's the boogeyman? And it's a good question, Tommy. What does Michael Myers represent? There is a scene where Laurie is sitting in English class and ponders her teacher's question about both Costain and Samuel's ideas on fate. And as she gazes out the window, she sees Michael Myers standing there. For a final girl, emphasis on the word girl, what is the terrifying fate that Michael represents that is so awful for her to contemplate? Looming adulthood? Sex? The loss of innocence? For a final girl, these are really scary things. So she must always be vigilant. Laurie is hyper-attuned to her surroundings and perceived threats. She sees Michael Myers behind the bush, but her friend, less concerned with being moral or good, simply doesn't. She sees him chilling in the clothesline outside. But was he really there? He is gone in an instant. Laurie tells herself, calm down, this is ridiculous. But she literally can't calm down. Laurie appears to be what's called overfunctioning. If we think about someone who has an anxiety disorder, you might imagine someone who is debilitated. They struggle to function in day-to-day life. Performing habitual tasks can be a challenge. They might struggle in their job and relationships. But there is a subset of generalized anxiety disorder called high-functioning anxiety. While not recognized on its own in the DSM, it is an important distinction to make when understanding and helping those who overfunction in their lives. To an outside observer, people with high-functioning anxiety may appear to excel and be in control. They don't appear to be struggling, to be avoidant, or to be retreating from life, such as we might expect someone with anxiety to do. They may have successful careers, participate in many different activities and hobbies, and have strong relationships. Yet behind this facade, overfunctioners have persistent thoughts of worry, self-doubt, and a fear of not being good enough. They are perfectionists, and appearing to be perfect and put together is incredibly important to them. So obviously, every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and they remembered their grade 10 best friend's birthday and sent her a cake, and volunteered to join the committee to save the bees, and joined that 30-day whole food reset challenge, and stress cleaned their house at 2 a.m. The notion of relaxing is often ludicrous to them because that state of nervous system, called parasympathetic, well, that feels very unsafe because that's literally when Michael Myers will pop out from behind the bush again and murder you. So better to create a filing system for all your tax returns from the past 14 years. This type of anxiety is persistent, often nonspecific or unnameable, but it feels kind of like there's a mass serial killer constantly after you, except you don't know where or when he's going to show up, and your only defense is to try to continue being absolutely perfect, keep being the good girl, keep being moral and responsible, and then you won't get into trouble. So how does someone end up overfunctioning in this way? Everyone's experience is unique, and there are a lot of potential reasons. But as a trauma therapist, I tend to look at events or relationships that resulted in individuals walking away with a nervous system that is stuck in a perpetual state of hyperarousal. This can include specific traumatic events, but also dynamics where caregivers had high or unreasonable expectations of them. Not shockingly, women are more than twice as likely as men to be affected by generalized anxiety disorders in their lifetimes. I'll let you fill in the reasons why you think this might be the case. Halloween's original title was The Babysitter Murders, and there is something uniquely female about that, and about the whole idea of female teenage babysitting. Think about the fact that this is Halloween night. Halloween, the most joyous, fun night of the whole year, where kids get to dress up as whatever they can dream up, go around the neighborhood and collect candy, goof around with your friends, watch spooky stuff on TV, and really indulge in their childhoods. But not teenage girls asked to babysit on Halloween night, not Laurie Strode. Laurie Strode wears a matronly apron and carves a pumpkin for the kids while they enjoy their Halloween night. She is responsible and seems so much like an adult. But the thing is, Laurie is a kid too. She is a teenage girl in high school. We place such lofty expectations on girls, don't we? To grow up fast, to be responsible, to take care of others, and to put the needs of others before their own, to not complain and do as you're told, and perform emotional labor and household labor and keep the kids safe and happy, and fight off all the evils of the world too. Laurie is just a kid, but she has to bear the impossible weight of being a final girl. This miniature adult who has to fast track her own fun childhood years, her own innocent Halloween night. I went trick-or-treating until I was 17 years old. Some people might think that's funny, but like I said, I was still a kid. I was in high school, and most of my female friends had already learned that their time was through. It was time to grow up, and we were too old to go trick-or-treating. It was immature at this point, because we were supposed to be mature young ladies, and this was childish and embarrassing. I had my costumeless friends over that year to watch scary movies, and last minute I said, you know what, screw this. We're going trick-or-treating. I don't care. Halloween is my favorite thing in the world. Next year, I'm going away to university, but this year, I'm still a kid, so let's do this. So we scoured the house for whatever costumes we could throw together, and I found this Goofy hat, like the Disney character Goofy from a childhood trip to Disney World. I put on some silly clothes. I put on a pair of backwards mod robes, if you're the same age as me to know what those are. And I was Goofy. I was 6 feet tall by the time I was 17, and I was a very responsible girl. But on that Halloween night, I was still a kid, and I was Goofy. And thank God I did that, because I'll remember that last trick-or-treat forever. Many final girls fly under the radar. People often don't notice that they need help because they overfunction and they appear to be totally fine. They may have even convinced themselves that they are totally fine too, and that they don't need help or couldn't benefit from pulling back, slowing down, or teaching their nervous systems how to relax and feel safe. It's like, who has time for that anyways? But we have had the benefit of watching Laurie Strode grow up throughout the Halloween franchise and revisiting her final girl origin story in 1978 through the lens of trauma and how her nervous system got absolutely mangled. It brings a new level of insight and understanding into Laurie and how living in total anxiety and survival mode for like 40 years takes a massive toll on you. I wonder what Laurie's life would have been like if she had been allowed to just be a kid. If she had gone trick-or-treating that night and hadn't had this intense pressure to be the perfect final girl. I mean, it was supposed to be called the Babysitter Murders, right? I wonder why, deep down, producer Irwin Yablans chose that name and was drawn to that idea of these tiny, responsible girls on the precipice of adulthood and the terror of that being taken away. It wasn't going to be called the Trick-or-Treaters Murders, now was it? As a therapist to final girls, this episode is a love letter to all of you. Final girls have faced down monsters, ghosts, and demons, and have fought like hell to survive. Her fight has made her tough, resilient, and fiercely independent. But on the inside, there are battle scars and shadows. Final girls are revered for their strength and ability to take on even the scariest of battles. But there is so much more to the final girl and her life than what lies on the surface. I work with other therapists on business strategy and marketing for their own private practices. And once, a client I was working with asked me how I make content that seems to be so on the nose, that seems to just really nail the issues that overfunctioners and final girls face. And I told her my secret. When I'm talking about what it's like to be a final girl, to be so tough on the outside and self-sufficient and independent, and like you've got everything in order, but feel so tired on the inside. Like you don't know how to relax because if you stop, that's when the nameless, shapeless monster catches up to you. I know about all of this because I am that final girl. I'm writing about myself. So from one final girl to another, I know that you don't know how to stop running and fighting yet. I acknowledge that you're not there yet, and that's okay. But I hope that there are glimmers. Glimmers of time when you can start to relax, practice safety with people who are good and that you trust, and know that you don't have to be perfect. You can dress up as Goofy for Halloween. That's a glimmer into this other part of you that I know is in there. And you can notice, hey, I'm still here and it's okay. Let's read some ghoul mail, shall we? This is the portion of the episode where listeners are invited to share what horror movies mean to them, how they have helped you with your mental health, or about a particular horror movie that you have thoughts and feelings about. I received some ghoul mail from my friend Shannon Knight, who lives in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been there once. It's really hot. Shannon is actually a huge inspiration and ghoul friend of mine. She is the host of the incredible Tarot Diagnosis podcast. The Tarot Diagnosis podcast is a weekly podcast that highlights the intersection of mental health and the practice of tarot and self-inquiry. The podcast is hosted by Shannon Knight, who is a licensed psychotherapist. Join her as she pulls cards and talks psychology and healing to help listeners better understand themselves and those around them. Shannon shared a little bit about her relationship with horror throughout the years with me. My relationship to horror has drastically changed over the years. As a teenager, I was obsessed with all the original scary movies like Amityville Horror and The Exorcist, along with all the newer films at that time. All of the Final Destination, Screams, I Know What You Did Last Summer, the Saw franchise, the list goes on. Once I turned 18, everything changed and I stopped watching anything scary. Looking back, as a therapist, I now realize I was coping with my chaotic, unpredictable childhood with horror because it was an outlet that mimicked my internal fear, but in a way I felt I was somewhat in control of. At 18, I moved out and everything became calm, so I didn't want to watch anything that felt scary. Fast forward to today, and my new partner is a big-time horror fan. Think Terrifier franchise and The Strangers. Speaking of The Strangers, I'll never watch a home invasion movie ever again. I was wrecked for months after that. However, I'm opening up to other scary movies now, and it was actually with your help that I realized my partner has become such a beacon of safety and authenticity for me that I feel like I have the capacity and curiosity to explore it with her. She also got me into true crime, which feels equally as spooky as horror. Anyway, thank you for all your creativity and the fun work you're doing in the sphere of mental health and horror. You're awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Shannon, and let me just say, I am probably the biggest fan in the whole world of yours. It can sometimes feel lonely to be a spooky, tarot-slinging psychotherapist who understands and appreciates the tarot's ability to unveil deeper layers of the human psyche and help clients to understand themselves and their feelings more deeply. So knowing someone like you makes me feel a little less alone in this world. You're such a huge inspiration to me, and I am so glad that you exist and that you are feeling safe and adventurous to explore horror with your partner. I truly believe that horror is a genre for everybody and that there's a level of accessibility that everyone can explore, from the spookier end of things where things aren't too scary to things that are very scary and gory, like Terrifier. I mean, Shannon, that's even a bit too scary for me, so props to you. Be sure to give Shannon's podcast a listen, and you can find her on Instagram at The Tarot Diagnosis. Do you want the chance to have your story read on a future episode of Mental Health is Horrifying? If you'd like to share what horror movies mean to you, how they have helped you with your mental health, or about a particular horror movie that you have thoughts and feelings about, send me some ghoul mail by visiting manymoonstherapy.com/mentalhealthishorrifying. And that, my ghouls, is the story of Halloween. Can someone out there please create an alternative storyline for sensitive angels like me, where Laurie Strode actually just goes trick-or-treating, and she's dressed as a lobster or something, and she has a really cute time with her friends? I would totally watch that version. Mental Health is Horrifying is entirely researched, written, edited, and produced by me, Candace Green, registered and spooky psychotherapist, with artwork by the ghoulishly talented Chloe Hurst. If you like this podcast, please consider rating and reviewing on your preferred listening platform. It really helps the show to reach all the other spooky ghouls out there, and I will be eternally grateful. And an eternity is a very long time for a vampire, okay? If you live in Ontario and are interested in psychotherapy with me, I offer therapy for final girls. My work is talk therapy mixed with the magic of tarot. I also offer other services around tarot, horror, and dream work, including through my group program, the Final Girls Club, including this month's feature, Your Hallowed Halloween Kit. You can follow me on Instagram at Mental Health is Horrifying, and you could also learn more about me and my services through my website, manymoonstherapy.com. Or you can also howl at the moon and I will hear your call. Happy Halloween!